The drums spoke a language older than the colony itself. In the thick darkness of the Haitian forest, 200 enslaved leaders gathered in a clearing called Bois Cayman. Lightning split the sky as Dutty Boukman, a Jamaican-born Vodou priest and coachman, raised his arms above the crowd. Beside him, a priestess named Cecile Fatimon plunged a knife into a black pig's throat. As the animal's blood mixed with the rain-soaked earth, Boukman's voice thundered through the night. The God who created the sun which gives us light, who rouses the waves and rules the storm, though hidden in the clouds, he watches us. He sees all that the white man does. The God of the white man inspires him with crime, but our God calls upon us to do good works. Our God who is good to us orders us to avenge our wrongs. He will direct our arms and aid us. Throw away the symbol of the God of the whites who has so often caused us to weep, and listen to the voice of liberty, which speaks in the hearts of us all. Within a week, the richest colony in the world would be ablaze. Within 13 years, the impossible would happen. Enslaved people would defeat 3 European empires and create the first independent black republic in the Western Hemisphere. This is the story of how hell became revolution, and revolution became freedom. Welcome to Historic Crimes TV, where you get the true story of events that have happened in the past which helped shape the history of the world that we are living in. Before we begin, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. By 1789, Saint-Domingue wasn't just wealthy, it was obscenely, impossibly rich. This French colony on the western third of Hispaniola produced more wealth than all 13 American colonies combined. Its sugar, coffee, indigo, and cotton supplied half of Europe's tropical products. The port city of Cap Francais rivaled any European capital in luxury and sophistication, with opera houses, grand theaters, and ornate mansions. But this paradise was a carefully maintained illusion, concealing one of history's most brutal systems of human exploitation. Saint-Domingue's society was divided into 3 castes, each nursing grievances that would eventually explode. The Grand Blancs, Great Whites, approximately 30,000 wealthy plantation owners and colonial officials who lived like feudal lords. They resented France's monopolistic trade laws and envied the independence of the new American Republic. Many had adopted Enlightenment ideas about liberty and representation but only for themselves. The gens de couleur libres, free people of color, about 28,000 mixed-race freemen who occupied a tortured middle ground. Many were educated in France, owned property, and some even owned slaves themselves. Yet the Code Noir and subsequent legislation denied them basic rights. They couldn't hold public office, practice certain professions, or even sit in the same church pews as whites. They were forbidden from wearing European dress, carrying swords, or gathering in groups. This educated, militarily trained, and wealthy class seethed with resentment at their legal inferiority. The enslaved, approximately 500,000 people, outnumbering free people 16 to 1. 2/3 were African-born, maintaining cultural connections and memories of freedom. They endured conditions so horrific that the average life expectancy on a sugar plantation was 7 years after arrival. Masters calculated it was more profitable to work people to death and buy replacements from Africa than to maintain healthy workers. To understand the revolution's fury, you must understand the system it destroyed. Saint-Domingue's plantations operated on industrial-scale terror. Enslaved workers rose before dawn and worked until dark, often 18-hour days during harvest season. Sugar processing never stopped, the mills ran day and night, and exhausted workers routinely lost arms or were pulled entirely into the grinding machinery. Punishment was spectacularly cruel. Workers were buried to their necks near ant nests, filled with gunpowder and exploded, roasted slowly over fires, or had their limbs broken with iron bars on the wheel. The colony imported 30,000 to 40,000 new slaves annually because so many died. Pregnant women received no respite and miscarriage rates were staggering. Families were deliberately separated to prevent solidarity. Any act of resistance met with grotesque public torture designed to terrorize entire plantations into submission. Yet resistance never ceased. Moronage escaped to the mountains created communities of free people who raided plantations and offered refuge. Poisoning of masters was common enough that special tribunals existed just to prosecute it. Small rebellions flared constantly, brutally suppressed but never fully extinguished. By 1789, 3 revolutionary movements were blowing their ideological winds across Saint-Domingue. The American Revolution, 1776–1783. French troops who fought for American independence, including free men of color from Saint-Domingue, returned with dangerous ideas about liberty and self-governance. The spectacle of colonists successfully defying an empire demonstrated that European powers could be defeated. The French Revolution, 1789. When the Bastille fell in July 1789, its ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity reached Saint-Domingue within weeks. But how did these universal principles apply to colonial slavery? The question would tear France apart and ignite the Caribbean. The Society of the Friends of the Blacks, this French abolitionist society, though small, gave voice to anti-slavery sentiment in Paris. Enlightenment philosophers like Raynal had already written that slave uprisings would be justified. These ideas, passed hand to hand, eventually reached even enslaved communities. In October 1790, Vincent Ogé, a wealthy free man of color who had been in Paris, returned to Saint-Domingue demanding political rights for free people of color. When authorities refused, he led a brief armed revolt with Jean-Baptiste Chavannes. The rebellion was crushed quickly, and both men were executed on the wheel, their bones broken one by one in public spectacle. But their martyrdom galvanized both free people of color and the enslaved population. Word spread through the colony: if educated, wealthy, French-speaking free men could be broken on the wheel for demanding rights, what hope existed for peaceful change? The Grand Blancs refused all compromise. The free coloreds grew desperate, and the enslaved population, watching the elite tear themselves apart over who deserved rights, began planning something far more radical. Throughout August 1791, coachmen, house servants, and enslaved foremen moved between plantations carrying coded messages. These were the colony's most mobile slaves, with legitimate reasons to travel. They spoke of a ceremony planned for August 14 in the forest of Bois Cayman, near Morne Rouge. Duty Boukman, the Jamaican-born Vodou priest and coachman, coordinated the conspiracy. But he wasn't alone. Jean-François Papillon, Georges Biassou, and Jeanette Bullitt, all enslaved men with varying degrees of privilege within the system, helped organize what would become the largest slave revolt in history. The choice of Vodou ceremony wasn't just spiritual, it was strategic. Vodou, a syncretic religion blending West African traditions with Catholicism, was forbidden and therefore one of the few spaces beyond colonial surveillance. By invoking Vodou deities and making the uprising a sacred act, the leaders united people from dozens of African ethnic groups under a common cause. The ceremony at Bois Cayman has become legendary. Cécile Fatiman, a Mambo, priestess, and Boukman led the ritual. According to oral tradition and later accounts, they sacrificed a black pig, an animal sacred in Vodou, and distributed its blood among the participants, binding them to the coming rebellion. Boukman's prayer rejected the Christianity that masters used to justify slavery and invoked a different God, one of justice and liberation. Each participant swore an oath: in 7 days, they would rise up simultaneously across the northern plain. The signal would be fired. On the night of August 21, the northern sky turned red. Beginning around 10 p.m., enslaved workers on plantations across the northern plain rose up with synchronized precision. They set fire to cane fields, which in the dry season burned like gasoline. Within 2 nights, 1,800 plantations were ablaze. The destruction was so vast that ships at sea reported seeing the glow on the horizon. But this wasn't mindless violence, it was strategic warfare. The rebels specifically targeted sugar refineries, which represented enormous capital investment and couldn't be quickly rebuilt. They seized weapons, horses, and supplies. They killed masters and overseers who had been particularly cruel, though many white colonists were initially spared if they didn't resist. At Galifet Plantation, one of the largest in the colony, enslaved workers killed the master and his family but reportedly wept as they did so, not from sorrow for the dead, but from the enormity of the line they'd crossed. There would be no going back. Duty Boukman led rebel forces in the initial attacks with fierce effectiveness. For 3 months, he commanded thousands of fighters, raiding plantations and battling colonial militias. But on November 7, 1791, he was captured during a battle and executed. His head was displayed on a stake in Cap Français's main square as a warning. The colonists hoped his death would break the rebellion. Instead, it became a rallying cry. The revolution Boukman had helped ignite would outlive him by 13 years and transform the entire Atlantic world. By late 1791, Saint-Domingue had fractured into chaos. In the north, rebel armies now numbered in the tens of thousands, controlling much of the countryside while colonial forces held the coastal cities. Jean-François and Biassou emerged as key leaders, organizing disparate rebel bands into more coordinated forces. In the west and south, free people of color, feeling abandoned by both whites and the revolution in France, launched their own uprising for civil rights. André Rigaud, a highly educated goldsmith, emerged as a leader. The conflict between free coloreds and Grand Blancs became a separate civil war. In the cities, panicked whites fled to Cap Français, Port-au-Prince, and smaller coastal towns. Thousands sailed for neighboring colonies, the United States, or France, carrying tales of apocalyptic violence that would shape white attitudes toward Haiti for generations. The richest colony in the world was tearing itself apart and the violence had only just begun. In August 1791, when the revolution began, François-Dominique Toussaint was nearly 50 years old. Born into slavery around 1743, he had been freed for over a decade and worked as a livestock steward on the Breda plantation. He was literate, rare among the enslaved, had studied medicinal herbs, and was known for his intelligence and discretion. He could have remained neutral. At 50, with his freedom and some property, he had more to lose than most. But Toussaint chose to join the rebellion not immediately, but deliberately. He first helped his former master's family escape to safety, an act that would characterize his strange sense of honor, then joined Biassou's rebel army as a physician and secretary. Toussaint's military genius revealed itself quickly. Though he had no formal military training, he possessed an intuitive grasp of strategy that astounded professional soldiers. He organized bands of guerrillas into disciplined units. He established field hospitals and supply lines. Most importantly, he understood that this war wouldn't be won through pitched battles against superior European forces, it would be won through attrition, terrain, and psychology. He studied military texts voraciously, Caesar's Gallic Wars, commentaries on Alexander the Great, treatises on fortification. He learned that in Saint-Domingue's mountainous terrain, a smaller force with superior knowledge of the land could neutralize European military advantages indefinitely. By 1793, he had earned the nickname L'Ouverture, the opening, supposedly because he found openings in enemy lines. He used it as a surname, styling himself Toussaint L'Ouverture, and began building his own power base independent of other rebel leaders. In 1793, revolutionary France and Spain went to war in Europe. In Hispaniola, this created an opportunity. Spain controlled the eastern two-thirds of the island and was eager to undermine French power. Toussaint and other rebel leaders Jean-François, Biassou, and others allied with Spain against France. This might seem like betrayal, but Toussaint's logic was coldly practical. Spain offered better terms, supplied weapons and training, and promised freedom to rebel fighters. France, despite its revolutionary rhetoric, had not abolished slavery. Toussaint would fight for whoever offered his people the most. As a Spanish auxiliary officer, Toussaint demonstrated his military brilliance. He conquered much of the northern province, capturing key fortifications and defeating French forces repeatedly. He built a disciplined army of 4,000 men, drilled them in European tactics, and paid them from captured supplies. Unlike other rebel leaders who ruled through fear, Toussaint inspired loyalty through fairness and competence. In Paris, under pressure from the slave revolts and desperate to maintain control of its colonies, the French National Convention took a radical step. It abolished slavery in all French territories. Ledger-Félicite Sonthonax, the French civil commissioner in Saint-Domingue, had already unilaterally abolished slavery there in August 1793, and now Paris ratified it. The news reached Saint-Domingue slowly. When Toussaint learned of it, he faced a crucial choice: continue fighting for Spain, or switch allegiance to France. In May 1794, Toussaint made his move. In a brilliant defection, he took his entire army over to the French side, bringing with him weapons, territory, and most importantly, legitimacy. He declared his loyalty to France's revolutionary ideals and to abolition. His timing was perfect. He switched sides when French fortunes were rising, gaining maximum advantage. This wasn't sentiment, it was strategy. French abolition gave Toussaint something Spain never could: legal justification for black freedom and potential recognition of his leadership. If he could present himself as a loyal French general defending republican values, he might preserve both freedom and power. Over the next 3 years, Toussaint systematically outmaneuvered, marginalized, or eliminated every rival to his authority. The Spanish surrender, 1795, and the Treaty of Basel, Spain ceded its portion of Hispaniola to France. Jean-François and Biassou, who had remained loyal to Spain, fled into exile. Toussaint absorbed their armies. The British invasion, 1793 to 1798. Britain, seeing opportunity in French chaos, invaded Saint-Domingue in 1793 with 20,000 troops. They hoped to capture the colony and restore slavery. It became Britain's Vietnam. Toussaint's forces used guerrilla warfare and yellow fever as weapons. British troops died by the thousands from disease. After 5 years and 45,000 casualties, Britain withdrew in defeat, signing a secret commercial treaty with Toussaint. He had defeated the world's most powerful navy without fighting a single major battle. Governor Sonthonax, 1797. Sonthonax, who had abolished slavery in 1793, returned as French governor. When he tried to assert authority over Toussaint, the general outmaneuvered him politically and forced him to return to France. Toussaint effectively became the colony's ruler while maintaining the fiction of French sovereignty. André Rigaud and the War of Knives, 1799 to 1800, the final internal threat came from Rigaud, the mixed-race general who controlled the southern province. The conflict between Toussaint's predominantly black forces and Rigaud's mulatto army became known as the War of Knives for its brutality. Toussaint, with his superior forces and strategic position, crushed Rigaud's resistance. Rigaud fled to France in 1800. By 1800, Toussaint Louverture stood alone at the summit. He controlled all of Saint-Domingue and much of Spanish Santo Domingo. He commanded an army of 20,000 disciplined troops. European powers courted him. He had negotiated as an equal with Britain and had maintained the appearance of French loyalty while wielding absolute power. He was 57 years old, a former slave who now governed a territory larger than many European nations. But his greatest achievements lay in what he built, not just what he conquered. Economic recovery. Toussaint understood that freedom meant nothing without prosperity. He implemented a controversial labor system that forced former slaves to continue working plantations, but now as paid laborers with rights. It was neither slavery nor true freedom, but it restarted the shattered economy. Religious tolerance. A devout Catholic himself, Toussaint protected voodoo practitioners and welcomed all faiths. He understood the revolution's spiritual dimensions and refused to persecute anyone for their beliefs. Education. He established schools and encouraged literacy. His vision was an educated black population that could govern itself. Racial integration. Unlike Rigaud's mulatto exclusionism, Toussaint promoted based on merit. His government included white colonists who stayed, free coloreds, and former slaves. He sought reconciliation over vengeance. International diplomacy. He maintained commercial relations with Britain and the United States while technically remaining French. He played great powers against each other masterfully. In July 1801, Toussaint took his boldest step yet. Without consulting France, he promulgated a constitution that declared Saint-Domingue was an autonomous colony within the French Empire. Slavery was permanently abolished. All citizens were equal regardless of color. Toussaint Louverture was governor for life. He sent the constitution to Napoleon Bonaparte, the new ruler of France, not for approval, but for recognition. It was a declaration of independence in all but name. Toussaint maintained the fiction of French sovereignty while gutting it of meaning. He had created an autonomous black state in everything but official title. Napoleon's response would determine whether Toussaint's creation would survive. Napoleon Bonaparte, the Corsican artillery officer who had crowned himself master of Europe, would not accept a former slave as an equal. Toussaint's constitution infuriated him. The loss of Saint-Domingue's wealth threatened his plans for an American empire. His wife Josephine, herself from a plantation-owning family in Martinique, whispered constantly about restoring the old order. Napoleon saw in Saint-Domingue not just a rebellious colony, but an existential challenge to racial hierarchy itself. If black people could govern themselves successfully, the entire system of slavery and colonialism stood threatened. As he reportedly told one of his ministers, "I will not leave an epaulet on the shoulder of a single black man." In late 1801, he assembled the largest colonial expedition ever sent to the Americas, 20,000 veteran troops under his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc, with another 20,000 promised as reinforcements. These were soldiers who had conquered Italy and Egypt. Their mission, restore French authority and, though Napoleon denied it publicly, restore slavery. The French fleet appeared off Cap Français on February 3, 1802. Leclerc carried secret orders from Napoleon: divide the black leadership through promises and bribes, then arrest them all. Once the leaders were removed, restore slavery incrementally. He also carried something more insidious: Napoleon's assurance that slavery would be maintained only in colonies where it had never been abolished, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and not in Saint-Domingue. This lie was designed to fracture Toussaint's coalition. Toussaint initially ordered Cap Français burned rather than surrender it, declaring he would fight. But Leclerc was cunning. He promised respect for black freedom, played on divisions between Toussaint's generals, and hinted at high positions in the French order for those who defected. One by one, Toussaint's generals switched sides. Henri Christophe, February 1802, the fierce general who controlled Cap Français, negotiated a separate peace and joined the French, bringing 1,200 troops. Jean-Jacques Dessalines, April 1802, Toussaint's most trusted general, known for his military brilliance and ruthlessness, accepted French promises and defected, bringing another large contingent. Others followed: Pétion, Clairvaux, Maurepas, commanders who had fought for years abandoned Toussaint for French promises of rank and respect. Why did they betray him? Partly Leclerc's manipulation, partly war weariness, partly the seductive promise of recognition from France. These were men who had fought for 15 years. French promises of maintaining freedom while offering peace seemed, to many, a reasonable compromise. By May 1802, Toussaint stood nearly alone. His forces had been defeated not by French military superiority but by political division. On May 6, he agreed to surrender, accepting a French offer of peaceful retirement on his estate. For 3 weeks, Toussaint lived quietly at his plantation, believing the war was over and freedom preserved. Then, on June 7, 1802, French troops surrounded his home at night. General Brunet, under Leclerc's orders, arrested Toussaint, his wife, and his children. Toussaint was immediately put on a ship to France, given no trial, no charges, no opportunity to defend himself. He was simply removed, as one might remove a dangerous piece from a chessboard. As the ship sailed, Toussaint reportedly said to the French captain, "In overthrowing me, you have cut down in Saint-Domingue only the trunk of the tree of the liberty of the blacks. It will spring up again by the roots, for they are numerous and deep." It was a prophecy. Napoleon had Toussaint imprisoned in Fort de Joux, a frigid fortress in the Jura Mountains near the Swiss border. For a man who had lived his entire life in tropical heat, the cold was torture itself. They took everything from him: his uniform, his papers, even proper heating. They interrogated him relentlessly, demanding to know where he had hidden treasure. He had none. Toussaint died nearly penniless. They denied him visitors, medical care, and adequate food. The jailer reported that Toussaint bore it all with dignity. He wrote a memoir defending his actions. He maintained his innocence and his loyalty to France. He never recanted his belief in black freedom. On April 7, 1803, prison guards found Toussaint Louverture dead in his cell. He was nearly 60. The official cause was pneumonia and apoplexy. The real cause was murder by deliberate neglect. Napoleon had given orders that Toussaint should not be allowed to die too quickly, but should suffer. The greatest black general of his age died alone in a freezing cell, thousands of miles from the land he had fought to free. But in that land, his prophecy was already coming true. By June 1802, the same month Toussaint was arrested, Napoleon's true intentions became clear. In Guadeloupe, General Richepince restored slavery with spectacular brutality, drowning resistors in the harbor. Word reached Saint-Domingue, France intended to restore slavery everywhere. Leclerc, following Napoleon's orders, began implementing the plan, disarming black troops, shipping leaders to France on flimsy pretexts, allowing white colonists to openly discuss restoration of the old order. The generals who had defected to France realized they'd been betrayed. They hadn't switched sides to restore their own enslavement, they'd believed French promises of freedom. Now those promises revealed themselves as lies. In September 1802, several key generals made secret contact: Dessalines, Christophe, Pétion, and others. They had betrayed Toussaint, now France had betrayed them. The revolution must be reborn, but this time, it would fight not for autonomy within France, but for complete independence. Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Toussaint's former second-in-command, emerged as the natural leader. Where Toussaint had been diplomatic and strategic, Dessalines was a primal fury incarnate. He was 50 years old, born in Africa, and carried scars from slavery that Toussaint, who had been relatively well treated, did not. Dessalines had no illusions about Europeans and no desire for reconciliation. His message to the population was simple: we have no more business with France. Let them come, we will burn everything and fight in the ashes. Nature intervened decisively. In summer 1802, yellow fever struck the French forces with apocalyptic force. Soldiers who had survived battlefields from Cairo to Milan died in their hundreds, then thousands. Leclerc himself fell ill in October and died on November 2, 1802. By year's end, of 43,000 French troops sent to Saint-Domingue, over 24,000 were dead, most from disease, not combat. Rochambeau, who replaced Leclerc, was a sadist who imported attack dogs from Cuba trained to kill black people and organized mass drownings. His cruelty only hardened resistance. The French kept sending reinforcements, and the fever kept killing them. Saint-Domingue's mountains and microclimate became a mass grave for European soldiers. The local population, having lived there for generations or centuries, had partial immunity. It was biological warfare, waged unconsciously. Dessalines rebuilt the Revolutionary Army with terrifying efficiency. His recruiting message was brutally simple: French ships bring chains. We fight or we die in slavery. Choose. Tens of thousands chose to fight. Former slaves who had returned to plantation labor took up arms again. Maroon communities in the mountains sent their warriors. Women fought alongside men. Even some free coloreds who had initially sided with France joined the independence movement. Dessalines organized them into a disciplined force using tactics learned from Toussaint but applied with greater ruthlessness. He divided his army into mobile columns that could strike anywhere, retreat into mountains, and emerge elsewhere. He scorched earth, systematically burning plantations to deny the French resources and forcing them to depend on fragile supply lines from France. In May 1803, revolutionary generals held a congress at Arcueil. There, they made several symbolic and practical decisions. They created a new flag by taking the French tricolor and removing the white stripe, leaving only blue and red, symbolizing the union of black people and mixed-race people, with white removed. Legend says Catherine Flan, Dessalines' goddaughter, sewed the first version. They declared they were fighting not for France, not for autonomy, but for total independence. They proclaimed Dessalines as their supreme commander, and they adopted a new name for their nation, rejecting Saint-Domingue, for the indigenous Taino name, Haiti, meaning land of mountains. By late 1803, Rochambeau's French forces were trapped in a few coastal cities, besieged by Dessalines' army and blockaded by British ships. Britain, at war with France again, was happy to assist Haiti's independence. The decisive battle came at Verdières, near Cap Français. On November 18, Dessalines' forces assaulted French fortifications. It was a conventional battle, the kind European armies specialized in, and by rights, the French should have won, but the Haitian forces fought with a desperation no European conscript could match. They understood that defeat meant re-enslavement. Waves of soldiers charged French positions, climbing over their own dead to reach the ramparts. François Capoy, one of Dessalines' generals, had his horse shot from under him, lost his hat, and continued charging on foot. Even French soldiers supposedly applauded his bravery. By day's end, French defenses had crumbled. Rochambeau sued for peace and was allowed to evacuate his remaining forces, about 8,000 survivors, from the colony. On November 30, 1803, the last French forces departed Cap Français. On New Year's Day, 1804, in the city of Gonaïves, Jean-Jacques Dessalines stood before the assembled generals and declared the independence of Haiti. Louis Boisrontonner, the secretary chosen to write the declaration, produced a document fierce and uncompromising. It is not enough to have expelled the barbarians who have bloodied our land for 2 centuries. We must, with one last act of national authority, forever assure the empire of liberty in the country of our birth. We must take any hope of re-enslaving us away from the inhuman government that for so long kept us in the most humiliating torpor. In the end, we must live independently or die. The document contained no diplomatic niceties, no appeals to universal brotherhood. It declared eternal independence and eternal hostility to France. It was signed in blood reportedly. Dessalines cut his thumb and used his own blood for his signature. Haiti became the first independent black republic in history, the first nation founded by formerly enslaved people, and the only nation born from a successful slave revolution. In October 1804, Dessalines crowned himself Emperor Jacques I of Haiti. Some historians view this as betrayal of revolutionary ideals, but Dessalines saw it differently. Haiti needed to present itself as an equal to European monarchies. A republic of black people would never be recognized. An empire might command respect through its familiar form. His empire was short-lived. In October 1806, he was assassinated by his own generals, who resented his authoritarianism and his attempts to restart the plantation economy, with paid labor, but forced labor nonetheless. His death plunged Haiti into civil war between the north, ruled by Henri Christophe as king, and the south, ruled as a republic by Alexander Pétion. In the mountains of northern Haiti, there's a massive citadel called La Ferrière. Henri Christophe built it after independence as a fortress against the French return that never came. It stands 3,000 feet above sea level, its walls up to 130. Please subscribe for more.